I think my favorite quote about fairy tales is a fairy tale is something that has never happened, but is,
Always have.
Always happening.
that's right, always happening. So the swamp hag has never happened, but is always happening. That's the whole point of a fairy tale or folklore is to symbolically describe a pattern that repeats in cultures. And particularly in European cultures, you have this interesting character of this woman who's like outside the village and who is sort of seeking to lure away children. And it's a really like creepy image, right? And I know, Elisa, you have done a deep dive on, is it the Baba Yaga?
Yeah, Baba Yaga. She's in Slavic folklore, like Russian folklore.
Okay, yeah, describe a little bit about what does Baba Yaga do, and what was she like?
Okay, so Baba Yaga is basically this old hag, or people call her a witch. Hag and witch are very similar terms. And she has this house in the woods that appears in different places because it's on chicken legs. It can like move. And it shows up often. Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's a hut on chicken legs. And it shows up often when a character is in peril or running away and they run into the dark forest, which you should never go into the dark forest. That's a motto of my podcast that I like to listen to, Myths and Legends. Never go into the dark
The
forest.
dark forest is dangerous.
Yes, so basically. So some young princess or some prince on a quest will go to the dark forest. They find this hut, usually unoccupied. It has sometimes a fence around it with like skulls and bones, and it's like putrid and gross and scary. And they decide to climb into the hut and seek refuge. And generally, the witch is out, and for I don't know why, but she rides in this mortar and pestle, like the thing you used to grind up like herbs or whatever. And she like flies around, she's riding around in it. And there's lots of stories. Ivan is like the John Smith of characters. Like it's just every prince is named Ivan. And then Vasilisa is a common name. So there's stories of Ivan and Vasilisa where Vasilisa's running away and she will come to Baba Yaga and Baba Yaga will tell her to do these impossible tasks. And if she doesn't do these tasks, Baba Yaga will eat her. And she has just very weird habits, and like she sleeps on the stove for warmth, which could be just like an era thing. Like that's just how she stayed warm. She has iron teeth that she sharpens. She is just a very like creepy person who uses people to do her bidding. And then they're like the prince will usually like come along in some of those stories and have to like fight her. I feel like I've only noticed that the princess is the one that has to like work for her and by some magical means escapes her, and then the prince usually ends up like fighting her, but sometimes they go to her for like help because she has like these magical things that she acquires, and so they need to get it from her or something. So yeah, that's Baba Yaga.
Baba Yaga.
Hansel and Gretel.
Yes.
Hansel and Gretel is different, but she is also an old hag in the woods that eats children. But she has like a very inviting home, like it's made of candy. Like come into my house. So it's a little bit different. I feels like, but yeah, very similar vibes.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating. So I'm going to play for you guys a little clip. There's a video that just was released last week called "We Stopped Fearing Swamp Hags and Society Collapsed."
Oh, funny.
So the idea is we have collectively as a society, like we have, centuries of folklore saying, be careful. If you're in danger, don't run into the dark woods and think that you can trust the swamp hag. I know you're going to have that feeling, but parents were very diligent for hundreds of years to warn their children to not go and trust the swamp hag. And today, our strategy for educating children is to literally drive them to be educated by the swamp hag. That's kind of the thesis of what they're describing. Here, I'll play a little clip for you guys, and we'll talk about this some more.
When you go to the swamp hag's house, what does it look like? Right? It is a mess. There is stuff everywhere. There's rotting food on a table. There's, you go to one of these modern swamp hag houses. What do you expect it to look like?
Modern swamp hag house. It just sounds great.
You expect it to look the same of
Yeah, it's just instead of like rotted flowers, there's empty Glade plugins all over the floor.
But you let me kind of hold on. I just want to finish what I'm saying here. So
And then you need to give me time to move this forward.
you as a swamp hag, modern times or the past, because you cannot find status within the existing world's metaphysical framework or within the existing world's things that you could do to like find a husband, have kids, work your farm, etc. You look for alternate sources. And the easiest way to build alternate sources is to build up an alternate and completely internal and subjective metaphysical framework. And that's ultimately what mysticism is. And one of the reasons why we try to preach against it on the podcast, because I think the swamp hag is part and parcel with the mystic outsider, as opposed to trying to build constructively within objectively observable frameworks and frameworks that can easily be debated within a community. But continue, Simone.
So I would point out this is not purely a genetic thing, and the swamp hag is different. Plus the banshee, they're different from spiteful mutants, and that they are sometimes time-based or life period-based things. You could have someone who was a normal member of society for most of their lives, and then I don't know, they end up divorced or widowed and childless, and suddenly they become a swamp hag. A lot of it has to do with the perfect storm of circumstances that lead them to a certain state. And these types of crazy women, crazy liminal women, specifically that manifest historically as banshees or as swamp hags, they're often age-gated. Like banshees are not necessarily old women. Swamp hags typically are. But the banshee is something that, as I said at the top, Asmongold has sometimes referred to too, or people in his chat have recognized, like, oh my God, she's a literal banshee, which people now mostly recognize as like, oh, like a screaming woman. But originally the concept was this Irish and Scottish otherworld woman who keens for the dead of particular families. And then this trope only later became this generalized screaming death ghost or attack monster. But the word banshee comes from this Irish word meaning woman of the mounds or otherworldly woman. And she's part of this wider fairy mythos. And she's traditionally, the banshee is supposed to be actually a family specific spirit. Like there would be the Collins banshee, I think. They were attached to old Gaelic lineages. And then if they wailed or you heard their wailing, it would foretell the death of a member of that family. And
fascinating.
Yeah, I like it. The banshee is not, she's not intended to be malicious. Her keening functions as both a mourning and a warning, making her more of like a messenger or guardian than a killer.
Okay, so what do we do with this? Like part of what I am trying to understand and just like drilling into the mythology here is it does appear like in most cultures, there's an understanding that a series of really tragic events could occur in a woman's life in which instead of really dealing with the tragedy, she decides to sort of take revenge against God and the community by developing her own ideology that makes sense of her tragedy so that she can, but then she's often then pushed to the fringes of society, and then everyone is sort of warned about her. Like, do not go out there. She's dangerous, and she does desire to eat children. And that eating is sort of like, consume them in some way, and that if they are in danger. And what happens in a society like ours that has become extremely materialistic, in terms of naturalism, we don't really think about symbols anymore. We don't hold on to these ancient stories. We don't take them seriously. We don't see them as warnings. We're taking Snow White and just invert and reverse everything and think that's the same story or even a better story. Think we can improve on ancient stories and their warnings because we don't even seem to understand the symbology or respect it at all. And somehow in this context, we've lowered our defenses and let the swamp hags into the center of society. And that is what they're saying we've done. And there's an inevitable collapse that's going to happen from within if you allow this to occur. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think a big modern day banshee or swamp hag is a Karen. Someone who is constantly just like yelling, angry at everybody, is angry at society, like protest. I think they said in that video, like protesters are a lot like the swamp hags, like people who just can't like. I feel like it has a lot to do with someone who, like, kind of like they alluded to, can't fit into roles in society very well.
Yeah.
And so they just kind of figure out how to put their female qualities out into the world some way by advocating for crazy things, or I don't like putting their crazy weird ideology out there as well. Just like a Baba Yaga would try to, bring in somebody, indoctrinate them, eat them, whatever, make them a slave. I think some women just kind of like have crazy eccentric views of the world, and that they are given a platform through social media, protesting, things like that, and they just kind of like screech at everybody their like ideologies, or I don't know. And it's interesting that a lot of weird ideology is like focused on like children, like indoctrinating children.
Right.
Like
That's
they're
the
not
part
gonna
to me worries me the most, because it seems like part of what I can get concerned about is in a society that doesn't have these defenses up anymore. If you are a Baba Yaga, it seems to me like you would want to be involved in some kind of child-centric career path, right? Like, why wouldn't you want that? If your goal is to consume children,
Yeah.
then if society doesn't have any natural defense instinct against what you're bringing into the society, you could easily corrupt a lot of these areas in which children are unprotected.
So where are the parents in this? Because aren't the parents the ones that are supposed to protect?
Right.
Yeah.
the
Like
children?
no one's really warning them about this type of person. This person could even be like their desire to indoctrinate the young could lead them into being a teacher role, I feel like. And the parents aren't like, watch out for the crazy lady that, is telling you these things that aren't in line with reality.
Right. Yeah. The idea that, the idea that you would have some kind of tragedy or some kind of set of circumstances in your life in which you would cause you to want, instead of repent or come back into the kingdom or accept the tragedy within the Christian framework, you decide to throw off the Christian framework and adopt a totally new framework of reality, and then take that framework into your profession, as a school teacher or whatever. And that there's no, even within the Christian world, there's not a very strong, defense against that. And I think that the just enormous eruption in homeschooling, we haven't really, I'm just saying, it's a fascinating thought to me to say, so why are so many Christians homeschooling? And just say, well, because society decided to let the swamp hags teach our children, and we don't think that's necessarily a good idea. Have you ever read about Baba Yaga? Would you let your children, like literally when I drop my kid off, at third grade, it's like kind of playing Russian roulette as to whether or not Baba Yaga is going to be teaching my child. Like there is no defense against that any longer in our society. There's no, like, here's our cohesive metaphysical assumptions about reality. If you decide that you don't want to be a part of that, then we're not going to let you educate our children. There is no defense like that. You can believe anything. You could believe incredibly destructive ideologies, and there is no ideology destructive enough to stop us from saying, if you are fitting in these criteria and you have these credentials, you can teach. Like,
Yeah.
one of those credentials is not whether or not you have the ideology of a swamp hag.
Yeah.
I was also it's probably also a lot of therapists, especially if they have like some type of traumatic reason for being the way that they are, and they are trying to come to terms with or figure out their own issues. Then lots of people like that go into psychology.
Yeah.
Like, even if you just think about like all of the gender stuff, it's like the therapists there, you're like, why aren't you doing your job?
Yeah.
Like, why are you affirming some people's mental illness when your job literally used to be the opposite of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important to reiterate like that Baba Yaga has a hunger for the young, and that she like just in that way of like they're going to go after our kids, and in the way of like you said, like people and affirming like what mental like something mentally like Baba Yaga isn't there to like help. She's she's there to enslave, to entrap, or to eat the person that had fallen into her way. And that person could have been like a perfectly normal individual before she tripped up and fell into Baba Yaga's hut, and now she's like enslaved with on threat of being like devoured.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about Baba Yaga's hut is that the swamp itself is this place where things are decaying.
Yeah.
They're old bones. So all these are just like symbols of they're they're she's like living in the refuse of society. Nothing can really grow or nothing is going to flourish where she's at. She's at the kind of the edge or the end or the where things are decaying and being kind of dissolved and destroyed so that new things can be birthed. But before that, you're in this sort of decay state. And so she's living, and I really feel like a lot of these women that are suffering from a lot of the gender ideology, they're living in the decayed remains of a Christian ethic. Like, like be empathetic, love your neighbor. They have these elements, but they're decaying. They're not connected to the gospel. They're not connected to truth. They're not connected to the overarching story. They're dissolving and elements of the Christian ethic or the Christian framework, and they're like sort of living amongst the putrid, decayed, dissolving, disintegrated elements of the Christian story, without its sort of cohesion that gives it its life, its vibrancy, its truth, its consistency. But it allows them to live kind of in this sort of dream world of their own making, in which they can be a hero, they can make sense of the tragedy of their life without really wrestling with the truth. And in order to reinforce these feelings and beliefs, and to think of themselves as not sort of a negative character, I think one of the ways in which they can feel good about that is they have to serve and indoctrinate children. Like I think that somehow like serves it's a nutrient to allow them to continue to exist in this space, without really dealing with the actual putrid nature of their dissolving beliefs.